Hey guys, this is Steve here. This is part two around this idea of contemplative prayer, of coming to God not because he is useful, but because he's beautiful. Not to get anything from God, but to be with God. Like a lover who doesn't want necessarily to be efficient or useful or do anything, but just be in the presence of a lover. And I'm going to use Psalm 62 today. We use Psalm 1 before. This is part two. We use Psalm 62. So Psalm 62 is one of my favorite Psalms, and it has this brilliant moment where it starts by saying, "My soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. He is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I shall never be shaken." Now, David is being shaken because he says a moment later that they are going to try and topple this leaning wall, this tottering fence. He's got pressures. He's being shaken externally, but he's saying internally, "I'm not shaken." So this idea that even though around us all kinds of things can shake us, we can be unshakable internally, which is what really matters at this time. Now, the first thing we need to do if we're going to be unshakable internally while the world around us shakes is it says you must speak truth to yourself. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. But then in verse 5, after going over his circumstances and the pressures in verses 3 to 4, he then commands his soul. He says, find rest. So before verse 1, my soul finds rest in God alone. In verse 5, find rest. He's actually commanding his soul. I've spoken about this before. A key discipline in prayer is to take the truth of God's word, take the promises of God's word, and speak to yourself and then command yourself. Like tell your soul, tell your emotions, tell your mind, tell your heart, tell your whole being to be still, to find rest in the presence of God. So I love that. David goes from speaking to his soul, verse 1, to commanding his soul, verse 5. And so we need to do the same too. Firstly, speak to yourself. Secondly, continually unburden yourself. So in verse 8, it's in verse I can't find it here now. Yeah, in verse 8, it says, trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Pour out your hearts to him. So verses 1 to 5 is about being still, about being silent, about finding rest. And then verse 8 is about giving him what's going on in your heart. Pour out your heart to him. This idea of just lamenting, going over the grief and the loss and the hurt or the joys and the happiness or the confusion. Just pour out your heart to him. There's an unbridled urging from David to the people to say, once you've been still in God's presence, once you've known him close, pour out your heart to him. Derek Kidner is one of my favorite writers on lots of the New Testament, Old Testament books. And he has this about verses 1 and 5 and verse 8. He says, together, they could hardly be two better expressions of spontaneous unburdening of oneself, which is one side of the matter, and disciplined expectancy, which is the other side. So there's this idea of spontaneous unburdening, verse 8, pour out your heart to him, and then disciplined expectancy. My soul waits quietly for God. My soul finds rest in God. So first of all, speak to yourself, better command yourself. Secondly, continuously unburden yourself with what's going on in your heart. But then thirdly, guard your heart. So verse 10 says, do not trust in extortion or take pride in stolen goods. Though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them. You see, though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them. Our hearts are always try and find things to find rest in when we are unsettled in life. And so we mustn't, whether it's riches and money or pleasure or whatever it is. What is our heart trying to find rest in right now? And it says, no. We mustn't find rest in anything but God. Though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them. So we must guard our hearts and think, am I drifting? Am I giving into sin, to overindulgence, to something, to some bad habit? Like, no, don't set your heart on those things. So contemplative prayer, Psalm 46, verse 10, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 62 gives us 3 great ways to do that. Speak to yourself, better command yourself to find rest in God. Continually unburden your soul and your heart and what's going on in your emotions. And then thirdly, guard your heart. Be careful. Just be discerning of where you're drifting. I hope this is helpful. May we find inner stability while at the moment in our world there is lots of shaking. Use Psalm 62. David used it. It's been a great source of help for me. Okay, God bless you.